Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Angie Barker-Jackson and I am the Vice President for Institutional Advancement here at Berkeley School of Theology. We are so delighted you have joined our first Friday Lunch and Learn session for today. If you have not already introduced yourself in the chat, please do. And we remind you each month that no matter where you are or what time it is for you, please feel free to enjoy a lunch or a snack during this time. Of course, that's why we call it Lunch and Learn. This series is sponsored and planned by the Alumni Engagement Office. Melissa LeBuff, Assistant Director of Alumni and Donor Engagement, is co-hosting with me today. She'll be monitoring the chat. So throughout the panel discussion that we're going to have today, be sure to drop your questions there for the Q&A time that will follow the panel discussion. And as always, Melissa is your source for information about future events. Thank you, Melissa, for everything you do. These Lunch and Learns have been designed with three purposes in mind: learning, connecting, and being. Each month we feature a different guest or topic, and our hope is that the variety of topics will stretch and challenge our minds, that will connect and reconnect with others in the BST network, and that this will be a space of radical belonging. Today, our topics are addiction, recovery, and the church's role in healing. My guests on the panel are from Crosswalk Community Church in Napa, California. Crosswalk is part of our American Baptist family and is Napa's First Baptist Church. Before the panelists make their introductions and we begin our discussion in earnest, I have a few things to share about addiction and recovery in America. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration conducts an annual survey of persons aged 12 and up, and the most recently published stats, at least online, are those from the calendar year 2019. And according to those statistics, in the month prior to the survey, 165.4 million Americans had used or misused a substance. 16 million were heavy alcohol users, and 65 million were binge alcohol users. 57 million had used illicit drugs in the past year, and 20.4 million had been diagnosed with substance use disorders. In addition to those substance abuse and addiction, process or behavioral addictions also plague our communities. Process addictions include those like gambling, compulsive sexual behavior, overworking, shopping, eating, exercising, and even internet usage. According to statistics, exercise addiction is found in 50% of marathon runners. Shopping addiction plagues about 4.9% of adults. About 25% of female professionals have a work addiction. 14% of college students report gambling addictions, and screen addiction is a rising issue in children ages 4 to 11. So America has some issues with addiction, and our communities have deep needs for recovery and healing. September is National Recovery Month, which was started in 1989 by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And it centers on these four key messages. One, the recovery journey isn't just for the person with the substance use or mental health issue. It includes everyone who cares about them. Two, when recovery care and support reflect someone's unique cultural values, they are more likely to succeed. Three, wellness in recovery encompasses a person's whole life, not just their substance use or mental health issue. And fourth, by sharing their stories and lived experiences, peers engage others in recovery with a vital sense of belonging, support, and hope. Today, we will reflect on these issues with 4 fantastic humans from Crosswalk Community Church. And I invite them now to unmute if they have not already and introduce themselves one at a time. And following their introductions, we will dive into our dialogue. Pete.
Hey everybody, I'm Pete Shaw. I'm the pastor up at Crosswalk. I've been there since November 1 of 1999. So I've been there a long time, know the story well, and look forward to sharing it with you. I'll call on Lauren and Lisa Haas.
Hi, this is Lauren Haas.
Lisa Haas.
And we've been at Crosswalk since 2009, I believe.
Yeah.
And you've been involved in the church pretty heavily since then.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian, and I'm a member of Crosswalk Church. And I'm also, not sure how to phrase it these days, a recovering alcoholic. Let's see. I've been sober for 11.49 years, 137.83 months, 4,197 days, and 100,714 hours. And I have one thing about recovery is it's not something that anybody intends to find themselves in that situation. But when it comes down to it, I'm grateful that there was a place to go. As they use the phrase in AA, it's the last house on the block. Sometimes you have nowhere else to go. And then after you get clean and sober, you're very grateful that that was there and their doors were open. And Crosswalk is one of many places, but it has a lot of open doors for a lot of recovering addicts of all different types of natures. So I'm grateful today.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us today, for engaging in a topic that sometimes is difficult in church circles. So I appreciate your willingness to be authentic and talk publicly about these things. So I'm going to start with Pete and ask if you would share with us kind of the story of how Crosswalk came to be the home of, get this everyone, 39 recovery meetings a week. 39. So, you know, what's the backstory for that, Pete? And talk, if you will, as you tell that story, about the discernment process, theological reflection, maybe around that, you know, the big why.
Sure. Yeah. So when I arrived in 99, I think we had 1 or 2 recovery groups meeting at the church. The church had gone through some really difficult seasons, and so we were ripe for turnaround, and that's kind of why they invited me to come. The evolution of the church really was organic and very slow, which I think is why we didn't blow up many times that we could have through the years, because we went from one conservative theological perspective and expression to a very progressive one now, and you know, with different marks along the way. And part of that had to do with our openness to the community and really thinking about our church facility, not just for ourselves and what we can do for our own people, but really as a ministry vehicle, as a tool to serve the community corporately. That just became more of an opportunity to say yes. So there was just a time where it seemed like more and more places were closing their doors for recovery communities. And so more and more people and groups started coming to our church asking for space. And initially it was like, yeah, sure. And then the more they got, the more and the larger they became, it kind of became a different experience. So, you know, right now in our administration wing, half the rooms are used for recovery, more for recovery groups than for church use, really, which is kind of a weird way to say it, because what is the church doing if it's not serving the community? But you know what I mean. And one of those groups, there was a pivotal moment where a group in our fireside room, which can hold about 60 people, they needed more space. We have a noon group that's always large, and every day of the week at noon they're there. And so they asked us, where could we go next? And so we have a gym. So we thought, well, maybe the gym, but the gym is a big barn and it's echoey. And so our executive pastor, who wasn't able to be with us today, she came over to ask me, how do we deal with this? And the only other space, that was bigger was our sanctuary. And she and I both grew up in church, and so our knee-jerk reaction was, "Oh no, not the sanctuary! That's that's the sanctuary." And then that lasted for like literally 2 minutes, and we both just kind of looked at each other and said, "Well, this is stupid. Of course, the sanctuary." And so for a season of time, we had a group meeting in there, and it was large, and it was really a beautiful, mind-blowing experience because my office is directly across, the hall from the sanctuary. And so on a regular basis, sometime between 12:15 and 1:15, I would hear all kinds of colorful language and more F-bombs than usual coming from our sacred space. more stale cigarette smell than I ever would have imagined. And really, it became endearing over time. Every time I hear somebody swear and say excuse me or whatever, especially if they're talking to me and they figure out too late that I'm the pastor, I really take it as kind of a badge of honor. The church is reaching out to people just right where they are, and that's been great. So we've just slowly evolved over time, and we've tried really hard to make that space a beautiful space over the COVID shutdown. We really ramped up those spaces to make them all beautiful because we think beauty inspires. And so now those rooms are really, really nice. And we're able to accommodate technology stuff so that just as things were lifting, they can all do Zoom meetings and have that capacity, which has been really good. And like I said before, most of the usage is for recovery now. The church uses them, as needed, but it's mostly for them. And that kind of leads into a second question that I know we wanted to talk about, which is, what does it take to do that? And I'll tell you that the first thing it takes is a mindset shift because we had to get to a place, and this was, again, a gradual process where the church members had to slowly buy into this and understand what this meant, because it did mean different things for our facility and what was happening there. I grew up in more or less stuffy churches where you had to mind your manners when you came to church, and a lot of the folks in recovery, they don't give a rip. They're in recovery, and some of them are in early stages, and recovery is messy. And some folks don't care that it's a church, wouldn't have any background to know what that would even mean. So it required a softening of hearts and an openness on the part of the congregation. We also wanted to make it easy and pleasant for the groups. And so we provide storage space for their stuff. And because they go through a ton of coffee, if you've ever been familiar with recovery groups, they blow through coffee like crazy. So we, upped our game on the coffee makers, which were expensive, so that you can fill 2 pumpers at once, and get them out the door and getting their caffeine right away. Storage space for their stuff with our renovated kitchen and cabinetry and all the meeting rooms, all that. We even bought the totes for their group so that we were sure that it maximized the space in the cabinets. So those are things at our expense that we wanted to do as host to make it good. There have been, some challenges along the way. We've never had really any major problems with like crime or vandalism or anything like that, which is great. And that's something that needs to be said loud and clear so other churches might feel better about it. We've had to, clue people in where the smoking section is in the parking lot so the whole facility doesn't smell like smoke, and they're generally very accommodating. They police themselves for the most part. And we've not had to do anything until really recently. They had one person that was in recovery for a very long time, and pushed the envelope in terms of what they could get away with, and verbally assaulting other people in the community. And they have to deal with it themselves. And they decided that as long as he didn't get physical, they were going to allow him there. And then he crossed the line with one of our staff members at the church. And so it was the first time we've ever done this, but we prohibited him from being on our campus until things change, until he wants to, change things, make amends, all of that stuff. So that's a little bit about what it takes. Theologically, our whole thing is how can we serve the community? So we're happy to do that. And now we really take it as a badge of honor. We're thrilled to be able to host so many. It's a mutual blessing. They help us out. They love us. And we're kind of their go-to for funerals. And that sounds weird, but it's an honor, that they are comfortable with us, to be with us and call us home. So I'll shut up a while because I will take the mic and go forever. So anybody else want to chime in? Lauren, Lisa, or Brian?
I will.
Okay,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Lisa.
My experience in this church has been growing since we arrived. And I've been 34 years a critical care nurse in this community. So I've also seen what addiction does to people as far as the patients that I have seen in the critical care setting. And in the church, I've learned, I grow and I've become more and more compassionate. And then my son suffered from addiction and he died, and we had the service at the church, and it was incredible, the community of the people that are in the programs that came and wanted to be a part of that service for him because he was in and out of the rooms. And it just became one big family with the congregation, and the people in the rooms came and in recovery. It was just a miraculous event, and I thought it was the most wonderful thing for our community. It just felt like we all became one, and it wasn't us and them, it was everybody together.
Yeah.
So it's been such a growing process for the entire community, those recovering from anything, and those of us who are working to help people recover. It's
Right.
been wonderful.
Lisa,
Yeah,
thanks
and-
for
and-
being willing to share something so personal.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead,
And
Lauren.
then, yeah, this is Lauren. Thank you. A lot of this, for people in the church who are not directly involved in the recovery groups, it's like this ongoing object lesson in how God redeems the world and our place in participating in God's work. Because we see people coming in and out of the door all the time, and it is really messy sometimes. Usually not bad. I mean, it's just, you read the statistics off to us. This is everybody in our community. This is not, some small group of people who are just, we want to hide away in the basement, which was the
Right.
typical thing, right? This is all of us. So we get to see it, we get to hear it, we get to participate in it. I feel really blessed sometimes. We make sandwiches for the homeless shelter about once a month, and I do that some of the time, and it corresponds at the same time as a women's Narconon group, and the stuff that goes on in the little kitchen where they make coffee while I'm making sandwiches, the conversations,
It's wonderful.
it's wonderful. It is so holy that it permeates the building, and that's another part of it, is that, I mean, this is a holy process that goes on, is as messy as it is. And then the other part of it is, it shows you that God's work in recovery for people, the model's not one and done and you're good. Okay. The model is, and Brian can talk to this more than me, is that, it takes a lot of work and you can't do this by yourself. And you need to be in community and you need to give it up to your higher power, right? So that opens a lot of doors, when people see that, not only for the people in the recovery community, but for the people in the church that come to understand that. So that, I love that. It's something that happens at our church. We feel like God is there all the time working, and we're part of it.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I remember hearing someone say, you hear a lot of great things in the rooms. And I remember someone saying, well, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is you never have to drink again. And the bad news is we're your new best friends. And that's true. There's a lot of love. Lisa's son was very loved. He was a good friend of mine. And you see some of the hardest looking people come in there, them doors. And also what was surprising to me is I've met doctors and lawyers and people that work at the grocery store, people on the streets that are homeless. There's every walk of life comes in the rooms, and they become your friends, and you learn to really care about them. And not only that, but you feel the love right back at you. Crosswalk has been a great place. Like I said, it's nobody ever wants to end up in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I remember I used to drive over the overpass. There's First Street overpass that goes right by the church before I was in the groups. And I remember looking, I would see the group of people out there getting ready to go to a meeting, and I would think, that is really pathetic. And then it wasn't too much longer that I was one of them. And I was so grateful that there were doors open and a place to go, and that people were willing to reach out and help me. I went to a meeting. I couldn't get past stopping drinking. And, every day I was so determined to not drink that day. And then once the 4 o'clock hour would hit, I'm like, all right, I'm going to drink tonight, but I won't drink tomorrow. And that was a cycle that I lived. And I shared that in a meeting, and a young man came up to me and he said, well, you won't be alone tonight at 5 o'clock. I'm going to meet you at your job. And that's where it started this time. And we were going up to 4 meetings a day. Like he really, and he said I was helping him too. And that's the beautiful thing, you give it away, but you get so much back in return. One thing that's great also about these meetings is on a Friday night, once a month, you'll see the park out at Crosswalk, and you'll think it's the biggest party in town because it's the birthday meeting. And that's a very special night because you get your chips. And if it's a 24-hour chip, like they say, that's the most important chip of all. But people are celebrating their sobriety if it's 1 to 20 to 30, 40 years, and there's always a speaker and they tell their story for about 40 minutes. And I've heard some amazing stories. And by looking at the person talking, you would never think that they would have experienced that, but they have, and it's real. And one thing too, when I went into the rooms, I didn't know how to tell my story. I didn't know how to talk. I couldn't speak without, getting ready to break down and cry. But after listening to enough people speak, I would identify with certain things. And I was like, oh, that's how you say that. That's how you put that emotion into words. And since then, I've learned to tell my story, and you pass it on. And you're always there for the newcomer, and you're always there for the person who's been there for 50 years, because not everybody makes it. I see some people who have 30 years sobriety, and they go out and you find out they died last night. And so it's a very serious disease, and I've learned that's dis-ease. We needed something to make us calm, and it's working today, but there's no guarantees for tomorrow. And so I don't hang around with people who are active drinkers or anything, because that's dangerous territory for me. And like they say, you hang around in a barber shop long enough, you're going to get a haircut. And that's just one of the many phrases you hear. At first you think it's so silly, but then you hear it and it's like, well, that makes sense. It's like, don't play around, but because I may not get a second chance. So, and I've been in and out of the groups, like, they say one day at a time, and that's it. It's so important to take it one day at a time, because I used to focus on like, oh, I just want to get 30 days. Oh, I was always looking down the road. It's like, just be in today, don't drink today, and tomorrow will come and will take care of itself.
Thank you, Brian. That's really, really beautiful. I want to spring from a remark that Lauren made a minute ago, and I see that we're starting to get some questions in the chat for a few moments from now when we begin to take those. So thank you all who are coming up with questions. But Lauren, you used the word holy a few minutes ago when you were sharing. You were talking about in the kitchen, I think at the time, but in conversations that I've had with folks that have been in recovery, and I participated in a group for a couple of years for family members of addicts, and I've heard people say and experience some of that holiness like that happens in a meeting. What I guess I'm trying to think about how do you talk to other church people who maybe think that the goal should be to get the recovering addicts into church, and yet what they experience in the rooms is often, more honest and perhaps holier than some of our traditional experiences of, corporate sort of, worship at church. Can anybody say anything about that? Talk about kind of that holiness a little bit more?
I think
Lisa?
I can. When I have been going to this church and growing as a Christian and learning more about what the honesty of being a Christian is, it made me more comfortable to involve myself in Al-Anon as the mother of an alcoholic. I wanted to learn how to fix my son. And what I found out was how to manage myself.
Right.
And in learning, like Brian said, to tell my story, because I couldn't talk, just like Brian said, when I first joined a group, I couldn't talk either. And then I learned to tell my story. The tears came out and the words came out eventually. The connection that I made with other people became the important thing. And I think what's happening is the role modeling that we do works for the people that are in the group with me to work on myself. And then I go to the church and I'm working on my spirituality and my connection with other human beings in the church. And it's a role modeling in all directions. So we see each other experiencing Christianity, and we see each other experiencing some healing in a different group, but the groups are related and meeting in the same place. And so it all gets connected that way. I think a big connection starts to happen, and some people start to feel more comfortable about the idea of not just going to the group meetings, but coming to church on Sunday or being involved in some other church participation that we're doing.
Thank you.
This is like a point of contention, different viewpoints on recovery groups. So some churches feel like, well, the true recovery is to get right with Jesus, and then everything falls in place. Okay.
Right.
And I can see that. That's a perspective, but that's not where we're at Crosswalk. Right. And in all of our recovery groups and pretty much all of our teaching, it's like, this is a pathway, right? But it's not necessarily, the journey is the reward. All right. The journey is where the growth is at.
Mhm.
It's not like making this commitment and all of a sudden everything's right, because that's not the model that works in recovery groups, right? That doesn't work. You have to stay in it and work a program to make it go. And isn't that really what life is about?
That's what I was
And
thinking.
that's how it works. Yeah. So, and there's different kinds of groups, and some people need a different kind of a program. We've had, I remember one guy that Lisa and I drove over to Santa Rosa to go into
Mhm.
this really conservative, I don't want to have it, really intense Jesus kind of a thing, right? And it was
And
constant Bible study and
Mhm.
constant church services and things like that. And he needed that. He really needed intensity, right? And not to try to figure it out.
Mhm.
And I think that's good for some people, and other people that's not going to work at all. So in our own community, we have all of those kinds of programs available.
Mhm. We have the room to grow
Right.
where you need to grow, and the help where you need the help.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we're just one. I mean, we go in one direction, but there's other ones that are available too. And for some people, that's good. That's what they want. That works for them. Or they grow out of that then and they come over a different direction.
Mhm.
It's really helpful. I'm curious, I'm going to sort of put Pete on the spot, but the others of you from Crosswalk, I'm going to ask a question about leadership. And since Pete's kind of the face of leadership at Crosswalk, I'll start with him, but the rest of you experience that kind of leadership as members of the Crosswalk community. So Pete, say a word about the importance of vulnerable, authentic leadership as a pastor, and how that might relate to, a philosophy or theology that's welcoming of people who are struggling deeply.
Yeah. Everything in me when I was just starting at the church was encouraging me not to be vulnerable at all, to not show any weakness, to not show any questioning. And then my ministry was falling apart, and so was I. And so I wanted to quit the ministry about 4 years in, and was finishing up my D-Min. And anyway, my D-Min project and stuff kind of saved my ministry, which was amazing, and still it lights me up. But what it did for me is it helped me realize how much I didn't know and how much I wanted to be curious about. And so that's been a very, again, we overuse the word organic, but it's been a slow organic process of change for me, and one of being honest with myself about what I thought I used to know, and now I'm seeing it differently, which is hard to do when you're shifting as the pastor who's teaching every week. It's hard to do, but it also gets easier the more you do it, because you realize that while it feels like it feels like failure, when you say I might be wrong about this, or I'm changing my mind, it feels like failure because that's how culturally we look at it. But the reality is when I'm when I'm shaking in my boots a little bit and vulnerable about my own growth and struggle with things, that actually wins more respect from the folks that are at Crosswalk anyway, now, than when I try to act like I have all the answers. So, my understanding of how I think about some of the challenges of traditional AA language, like in the early days, well, why can't they say God instead of higher power? So I had to kind of sort through my own theology on that, and ended up landing on a place that, well, who gives a rip? Who cares? Let God do the revealing here. If God chooses to want something more specific than higher power and whatnot, and also just really started to respect for myself the reality. Richard Rohr speaks into this a lot, that the 12 steps are one of the most if not the most transformative experiences that anybody can and should go through. It's remarkable. And so I took the church through this many years ago through Richard Rohr's book, Breathing Underwater.
Such a good one.
And really it was helpful to me. And I would often say at the beginning of my teaching for the Sunday, I don't care if you're getting anything out of this, because this is doing a world of good for me, kind of a thing. So I think that's kind of our MO now. I think at church is, we've kind of defined over years who we are theologically. And so I don't think that part's going to shift as much. We're very open, very progressive. But still, I really do think that we embody an ethos that is open and relational with each other, and growing and curious. And we give freedom for people to do that in a lot of ways. And experimenting, okay to fail. I think that's a big part of our flavor. And I love it because it gives everybody freedom to be a human being. And as far as I can tell, we have no culture in Crosswalk of errors, or I don't know, as a new member, Angie, you can speak into that yourself, but I really don't think there's any, I don't know, there's no pretense, I don't think, in our church. I lead the singing every now and again, and I always screw up, not on purpose, but just because I'm human. And again, the feedback we get is not, oh, I can't believe you screwed up again. It was like, hey, hooray, you screwed up again, because that's the culture. Yeah. And it's an incredibly freeing space to be now.
I appreciate that. I know as an observer, as a church member, to hear even like mental health and like self-worth, self-esteem sorts of things be talked about from the platform in real honest ways. To me, it really reminded me of some of the honesty, that you find in recovery rooms and things. So I feel like we've got some things working there. Before we shift to questions from the chat, Brian, you may not have gotten as much microphone time as everybody else. And so I want to invite you to just, if you have another word or two that you would like to share, I want to invite you to do that. And I also, thinking about leadership, Brian, I'm putting you on the spot and you don't have to go this direction with your word, but are there ways in which your journey of growth through recovery has empowered and equipped you to lead? I know one particular way I've observed myself, but I would like to know how that has developed inside of you as a personal growth sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you. So the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's something nobody wants to do. It's frightening, but when you walk through them, it's very revealing. It's kind of like your sponsor comes up beside you and helps you dissect who you are. Like when I was drinking, had this dark cloud over me, and I couldn't see clearly. But when I was able to, with another person, lay it all out and realize my life's not that bad, and it can be. We can work on this and we can fix it, and you can have a very good life. Step 3 is one of my favorites. Was made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood Him, and that was just life changing for me, because the way I knew Jesus as a little boy, and I felt so much shame growing up that I almost didn't want to even talk to Him anymore.
Mm.
And then I realized that he was still the same God that I understood, and that he reaches to each of us individually and meets us where we are. You know, I've seen a lot of people come in the rooms who have been turned off by God, didn't want to use that kind of language, but I've watched God. God is so cool because he'll reach them where they are. Like they'll use language. Can you think of a power greater than yourself? And you know, you don't have to use the word God. And they're like, well, the ocean. Okay, can you make the ocean do what you want? No, it's bigger than you. And that's just a little crack where they can open their mind. And I've seen God use that. I've watched people who don't want to ever talk about God become to where they want to know God, and then they rely on him. And it's been amazing. For me, I've considered myself always to be a Christian. I just felt for a long time that I failed, and I realized that I haven't. And all of the weaknesses that I had have ended up being my strengths. And so I could stand confidently in front of people and say, you know, I'm an alcoholic, I'm gay, and I'm a wonderful, and I'm an amazing person, and God loves me. And people, it helps people lower their guard, and then they feel empowered to talk to me and open up. And then I realized that we're all just people trying to get through this life, but you can do it in a most amazing way and feel loved by God. And that's the thing, you know, if the world rejects me, that's one thing. But if I got God on my side, then I'm good.
Thank you, Brian. What a beautiful way to transition to questions from people here listening to this conversation. Well, Melissa's queuing up a question. I would say, since Brian didn't toot his own horn, that Brian is a beautiful songwriter, singer, and worship leader. And so I'm sure some of that comes from that journey that he's been on over the last nearly 12 years, but he's really good. So
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank
Melissa.
you. Yeah. So we have a question from Jim Hopkins. He says, I have a friend who says that there is no such thing as failing at recovery. Rather, it is a process that has many facets. Does that ring true with your experience?
It is a process. You know, I've gotten sober and I've backslid and ended up, one time, like I said, I was always trying to get time. I got 3 months and I went out and celebrated and went back out for 3 years, and it about killed me, and what I call it is washing up on shore. By the grace of God, I was able to make it back into the rooms and give it another shot. But each time you kind of learn something and you don't want to feel that pain no more, because you felt the goodness of trusting your own heart and trusting your own instincts. So yeah, never give up. That's for sure.
That is awesome. Thank you. I'm gonna go back. Pete, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but Matt Duvall asked a great question, which is, how could you talk about the shift of being more inclusive, the language being more inclusive? The recovery work of Crosswalk changed the language you used in the pulpit, or maybe what was the connection between what was happening in your preaching and teaching and what was happening in the rooms of your church? So kind of talked about that a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I think there was a shift over time. The more we grew into, it was a process. My own growth that needed to happen changed the way I talked about it. First, just moving from an us and them mindset, because that was definitely there. And what can we do for these people kind of a thing, into there is no them. It's difficult with language to do that always consistently, because they are autonomous, they're their own groups, every one of them. So I think, and then, like I mentioned before, the how we think about God, but then also just, being honest about how everybody is, kind of to Jim Hopkins' point, is that we are all in process. that we're all recovering from something, and we always will. And mostly it's our own ego, an expression of that, our own pain that we are dealing with or whatnot. So just saying that just sort of takes some pride out of the room, like, oh, well, sure glad I'm not, struggling with ever. And that's a bunch of crap, because we're all struggling, and we all need the process. I'd be curious to hear what Lauren and Lisa and Brian and Angie have to say about language that they hear too. I know what I think I'm doing, but what am I really doing?
I think I've heard a lot more vulnerability from the pulpit over the years, for sure. I think when you make mistakes, it's just written on your face that you're not ashamed about it, that you're so glad you made that mistake, because it reconnects you to the people in the congregation again. I mean, it's a constant reconnection. So when we make ourselves more vulnerable, and we see you make yourself more vulnerable, or just being yourself, or being happy about your mistakes, it's just a constant reconnection to the reality of who we all are. We're all making those mistakes every day too. So I think that's huge.
Yeah. I think the language in our congregation has changed too, because I hear a lot. Well, we used to have a big food pantry, but COVID kind of changed that, and we've shifted it. But when we were doing that, we'd always tell people, you are part of Crosswalk's community now. You get to define what that means to you, but to us, you're now part of our community, right? So you have, please come, we want you to be here. We're happy you're here, and that carries over into our recovery groups and other groups, and we get a lot of crossover because of that. That people appreciate the vulnerability, that we show, the desire that we want you here. You can be messy, it's okay, and so we have some wonderful members that have come out of various recovery groups over the years, and give us a lot of strength, and continue that vulnerability, just make it part of our personality.
I know for me, I've been to many different churches in my life, and Crosswalk was the first church that and Pete is the first experience that I had that I could absolutely 100% be myself and tell my story and be completely open, and not be like, well, if you change this and you change that, then, you might be okay. And, God will be pleased with you 100%. It's been a very safe place. I've watched it with other people too, who come in the rooms or come into this church and feel safe. And some people you just can't please, because they're still dealing with their own mess. But, one thing about AA is interesting is, some people come in there because they call it a nudge from the judge. They don't want to, but they've had a few DUIs, or they haven't come to terms yet that there might be a problem. And, they start with the nudge from the judge. They have to have a piece of paper signed. And after a while, a lot of them end up coming on their own, because, you find hope, and you find that you find your higher power. And it's amazing to watch God at work, because he'll go down in the dirt with you, and help pull you out. And it's not as painful as you would think, but it's freeing of all things.
One of the things I forget now which direction that question came from and how it started, but I think about the language used at Crosswalk to talk about God and God's presence, not God not being far away, but near and among, and, our very breath, those sorts of things really resonate with me as an individual. But when I did spend some time in a recovery group during a season, went through the 12 steps as a covenant with a group of people. Those who struggled with kind of a traditional picture of God, or a traditional religious, framework, often talked about the higher power being the community. And so, to be in a room and the strength was, not in someone far away, some higher power far away, but, among the people in that room, in the honesty that's presented and shared. For me, that really, really gels with the way we talk about God at Crosswalk, that God is in and among and through, and the connection among all of us, as well. And so, so that resonates for me, those two ideas about, a power greater than ourselves. And of course, we're stronger together, right? And so that's where I thought when that question came. Do we have another question, Melissa, before we may have time for one question?
We don't have another question, but we do have a comment from Peruse, and he says, that mental health issues are obviously global issues. And then he goes on to share some research that's going on in Canada right now. And so if anybody's interested in that, he dropped a link to at the bottom of the message. So yeah.
Thanks, Peruse.
Thank you, Peruse.
Very good. So are we ready for announcements, Melissa?
I think so. So thank you to everyone who participated and asked questions today. We really appreciate it. The first announcement is that the Clinton Foundation is providing a training opportunity called Empowering Faith Leaders to Address Addiction and the Overdose Crisis. This is for faith leaders, and it is a course over 10 monthly 3-hour sessions from September 2023 through March 2024 in San Francisco, California. The Clinton Foundation works in collaboration with state and local partners, including the California Department of Healthcare Services, to train faith leaders to address addiction and the overdose crisis using evidence-informed and compassionate approaches. Faith leaders who participate receive $2,000 in funding and technical support to plan and implement community-based engagement projects to raise awareness, share resources, and reduce stigma. Angie, I think Angie dropped the link in the chat. So to learn more, click on the link and apply, and you can check out the Clinton Foundation's link. And then, so moving on to BST announcements, the Alumni Office is hosting nominations for the 2023 Distinguished Alum of the Year Award. So anyone is welcome to submit a nomination. So this could be like a fellow congregant, a colleague, a faculty member, a volunteer, or another alum. So if you know an outstanding BST alum in your community, please visit our website through the link in the chat and submit your nomination. And last, we have 2 upcoming First Friday Lunch and Learns. On Friday, October 6th, President Jim Brenneman will speak about God as executioner, is genocide ever justified? That should be a very interesting conversation. And on Friday, November 3rd, Dr. Laura Jean I'm so sorry, Dr. Laura Jean Torgerson will present Do Syrophoenician Lives Matter? Justice, Identities, and How We Read the Bible. And so that's also going to sound really great. And you can register for both opportunities on our website, and that link was also dropped in the chat.
Very good. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, everyone who attended today, for your good questions, for your good listening. Thank you especially to Crosswalk Community Church Napa, Pastor Pete Shaw, Lauren and Lisa Haas, Brian Worrell. We're so delighted that you all would spend an hour with us and share your experiences during this National Recovery Month. We wish everyone wellness in the coming month and look forward to seeing you at future Lunch and Learns. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.